I've prepared a few small questions to maybe also challenge you a little bit. And then, of course, if you have questions, feel free to ask them. And we will not make it too long. So, yeah. And of course, the first question to you, Rich, is what do you think about resumability and about the things Qwik are tackling? And do you think you will somehow integrate these ideas somewhere in the future into Svelte?
I mean, I have to begin by taking my hat off. It is fiendishly clever stuff, and obviously these are ideas that have been out there for a while, but Qwik is the first implementation of them that has brought it into the mainstream. And it's extraordinary stuff. Like with the Insights dashboard is a level of engineering that I don't think any other framework is doing. Where Miško and I differ is on the relative importance of this stuff. We profile a lot of sites that we see in the wild. If people come to us and we're like, what's going on with our Svelte app? Take a look. And like hydration just isn't the problem, candidly. The problem is third-party JavaScript. The problem is large images. Problem is like a slow, shitty server. And so like as an engineer, like I really love what Qwik has brought to the conversation. And I'm always excited when new ideas like this come along and say, hey, actually that thing that you all thought was a best practice, we can do way better than that. And I assume that these ideas are going to filter their way into other frameworks in some shape or form in time. But for us, having the application running fully in the client gives you a different developer experience, and it's closer to the developer experience that we want. So our position is like, yeah, hydration is kind of pointless and you're wasting time doing it. But if you can make it fast enough that it just doesn't matter, that is the best possible outcome. And so that is what we're striving for. I'm going to hand over the microphone to Miško, and he's going to say, actually, no, I have looked at data too, and it really is a problem. And I guess it's just a question of which data you're looking at. And I will concede that, we have looked at some sites in the past where there is just so much JavaScript running and it is blocking the main thread for like noticeable amounts of time. And there's like kind of nothing that we can do. But for our money, because it's such a fundamental thing and you have to kind of orient your entire framework around it, it's not a trade-off that we have found ourselves wanting to make.
I think you're right that there's other things like images and third parties, et cetera, and that's true. I think our stance is more like, this is just a better way of doing it, and if you can get it for free, why wouldn't you, right? Now, you obviously have to make it to a different framework and you have to think about it differently. But then there's also situations where like you start small, every website starts small and you start building it and it's like great. And then one day you wake up and you're like, it is freaking slow and I don't know what to do about it and how to fix it, etc. So when you get large, like I've been having conversation with Cloudflare and Microsoft and big websites, huge content, right? It is absolutely a problem. And they're fully aware of it. They know about it, and they just don't know what to do about it. I was actually just having dinner from somebody from Amazon, and they're like, "Yes, we live and die by the ability to serve the content fast, and we can't actually have any sort of framework. Like if you navigate to Amazon website, all the stuff is good old no framework. They use frameworks for things like comments once you scroll to the bottom, or maybe the menus once you start interacting. But the main page of the site is no frameworks, and specifically because they really want to make sure that it's super fast and they can just click, etc. So it's a complicated answer. But my take on it is always like, if we can just do something better out of the box, I think, to put it differently, like, if you could roll back time and if you could restart it, if you know what you know and you would rebuild a framework from the beginning, wouldn't you include something cool like hydration? I mean, presumability?
Well, so the two words that gave me pause in everything that you just said is for free. And I like it's not, there are no free lunches in engineering. Like, everything has trade-offs. And for me, the trade-off that is involved in making resumability possible is in the developer experience. And I'll give you an example. Like, it's very often the case that you will need to prevent an event default based on some condition, and you don't know what that condition is without running some code. And you can prevent event defaults declaratively in Qwik, but if you need to prevent the key down event, but only if it's a tab key.
We already have that solved.
Okay. So
try another example.
but this is the thing. It's like, okay, so we'll solve this problem and then this problem and this problem, and before you know it, like, the surface area has got a little bit larger than you initially anticipated. And so while I think any new framework would absolutely start from a position of Qwik is a thing that exists in the world, and that is the benchmark that we're trying to hit, like, we just always have to remind ourselves that there are costs to any avenue that you take. Svelte has costs. The things that we've chosen to do have costs. Qwik's approach has costs. And it's really about which costs matter to you as the designer. And one of the things that I cherish about working in the JavaScript ecosystem, as opposed to, say, the PHP ecosystem, which is a lot more centralized, as we've seen over the last couple of weeks, is that it's possible for us to have these different sets of priorities. And that's okay. Like, we can serve our audience who cares about the same things that we care about. Qwik has its audience of people who care about the things Qwik cares about. And we can respect each other, we can learn from each other, but we don't have to become each other. And I think that's a thing that is kind of unique to JavaScript, and it's a thing that I really appreciate.
Well, I gave you a big hug when I came in.
Yeah.
Okay, I have another question that's that's for you, Miško. So we heard now about Svelte 5 and also saw some new features. And as I'm part of the ecosystem of Qwik, I know Qwik V2 is around the corner. And maybe tell us what's new in Qwik V2, and maybe what do you plan to work on after Qwik V2?
Yeah, so I don't know, like, in every project you do, you realize all the mistakes you've done. I'm sure you have that, right? And you look back like, oh. So the main kind of impetus behind version 2 of Qwik is that we wanted to get better at the way we serialize data. We wanted to get better at tree shaking, be more clever at the way we get rid of stuff that you don't need. There's a tree shaking that's usually used for code, but we also tree shake data. So, like, for example, you can have data that only is needed on initial render, and once the page is rendered, you kind of never update the data ever again. So it's a read-only data, and therefore you can throw it away for the output. And so Qwik 2 basically does these kinds of improvement about, like, the way things are serialized, the more intelligent way of, like, not leaving comments within our HTML, because we want to move text. We want to basically move all this extra data to the end of the file where it doesn't matter, right? So the browser can just render the UI, and then, yes, on the end you attach some additional information, but, like, that doesn't negatively affect what the user experience is. So it's kind of an optimization thing. I'm pulling.
What's next after that?
Oh, what's next?
Any ideas?
Sure, something will come. So I'm sure some ideas will come. Like, the ideas are not the problem; it's the execution that's the problem. Dollar signs. Yeah. So the dollar signs. Not that it was a question anybody asked. I just think it's first of all, I think it was funny when first we came up with dollar signs. Like, people were all up in arms about, like, why would you do that? Like, why are we going to jQuery days? As you've discovered, the dollar sign is the only symbol you get to use, like that or underscore, and nobody's using underscore, right? Like, there's no other symbol that you can use in kind of language. So that's why it's the dollar sign. And I just think it's nice that both Svelte and Qwik have this thing where we use dollar sign as a marker to the compiler to say, do some magic for me over here. I think that's just kind of nice that we came up to the same conclusion.
So I had, of course, a lot more questions, but maybe we tackle them at another time. If you have maybe 1 or 2 questions, we can still do them. So feel free to reach out.
I have one question. I want to ask you, what are the best practices do you suggest to developing the Qwik applications?
What is the best practice for developing Qwik applications? I don't know. I don't. This is what I always find interesting. Maybe you feel you have the similar experience. Is like you build a framework, but like you don't actually get to build that many apps. And so there are people who know a lot more about building apps than you do. Do you have that experience too? Or you actually use your okay? So I always find that interesting. I think best practices is like, on the end of the day, you just have to be aware of what you're doing, right? Like the frameworks will do a lot of things for you, but like it still helps to be cognizant of like how the magic works, right? To have a kind of a preliminary understanding, because things that look innocuous can actually have a huge impact on whether the amount of data you're sending to the client or performance or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
I would maybe say start with our CLI command to spin up the Qwik app and select the right preset, and then just go from there on and expand it as you need it. Yeah.
I think my question is going to be about, well, I've been talking about TC39, like all these different standards that are coming out. But I wanted to get your thoughts on standardization of signals, especially in the web platform. I wanted to know, like, from a framework perspective, how excited are y'all? I guess, like, what are your thoughts on these standard signals? Is it going to be easy enough to integrate into your frameworks? Yeah, that's pretty much my question.
First?
Sure. So this is maybe true for the Qwik team as well, but we actually have a member of the Svelte team who is on the TC39 signals working group, Dominic. And I've kind of been observing that work from a distance. He would have a much more informed opinion than me. From where I sit, I'm glad that this work is happening. I don't yet know if it's going to bear fruit. I think it would be a huge win if we're able to have, one library for reactive media queries or whatever it is. And you can just use that inside your Svelte app or your Qwik app or your Preact app or your Vue app or whatever it is, because everything uses this underlying functionality. I'm a little concerned about the performance of native signals. We only have a polyfill to go on so far. The polyfill is based on Angular signals, and it's hella slow. Like, I'm not going to lie, it is direly slow, to the point that, unless it gets much, much faster once it's implemented in browsers, we couldn't possibly use it. And I don't know how much of that is just because it's a polyfill that hasn't been optimized versus it's a standard, and so if it needs to cover all of these crazy edge cases that don't really concern frameworks, particularly compiler-based frameworks, where we can constrain what you can do with the signal. And I kind of think about how, people used to use Lodash a lot to do filtering and mapping of arrays and stuff like that. And everyone just assumed that when we got it in ES5, that it would be part of the language, that great, we're not going to be able to use, we're not going to need to use Lodash because we're going to have it in the browser. And so it's going to be super fast. And it was not super fast because you have to handle holes in your arrays and like all of this other stuff that is written into the spec that libraries don't need to worry about. Promises would be another example. It took a long, long, long time for promises to get anywhere near as performant as Bluebird. I'm kind of dating myself here. I don't know how many people were kind of following that saga 10 years ago when that was going on. But it's possible to me that the same thing could happen with signals. So I'm happy that the work's happening. I'm excited to see where it goes, but it's way too early to like make a commitment that we're going to like build Svelte 6 on top of native signals or something like that. It's just too early to say.
I have this thing that over the years I kind of come to the conclusion. Like when I was younger, I was like, yes, standardize everything. It's great. It's awesome. Now I'm like, no, you should only standardize things that you cannot do in user space. Like you can build a library that would do signals, and all the frameworks could use it if we found this to be useful. And if you can do that, then you should probably do that. Now, this particular line of thinking doesn't always work because, for example, there is benefits to having promises being standardized in the language. There's benefits to having exactly one representation of a string or one representation of promise, or and so on and so forth. But like in general, like I am very I prefer not to add stuff into the platform, because once you add it, it's there forever, and then like it's impossible to get rid of, and it might be not perfect, and you can't version it. It's just, you're stuck. So my skepticism basically comes from like, I don't think it's a good idea to do complicated things where the exact solution isn't necessarily obvious, and like tie ourselves in, because like you can't do versioning, you can't do many things. Also, I am like, in the case of promises, there's benefit having library and application having the same language or the same type. I'm not so sure that there is that much benefit in Svelte and Qwik actually using the same underlying library for the for signals, because like the syntax is going to be different anyways. So like, what's the point of sharing that piece of code? So anyways, I think from the point of view of like just cautionary tale of like, you don't want to add things to the platform unless like it's absolutely necessary and you are for sure know that is the right thing to do. I am skeptical that we should do this.
Thank you.
Okay, I think, okay, one more question. Wait, the microphone is coming.
So my question is not specifically about frameworks, but even on that slide, you have like 3 different frameworks, and the web development world is moving really fast. And even if you just choose one framework to work with, it's a long way to go from just a simple tutorial to now you have a large scale real world application. How do you keep it performant? How do you structure it? All those things. So my question is more like, so both like when you're trying to like improve yourself and as you work in a team, there's like new people joining that might come from different experiences. How do you help them get better in those frameworks? How do you get better yourself? I was wondering if you guys have like any thoughts on those things.
I mean, as hard as it is for all of you, I think it's probably harder for us, honestly, because like we're thinking about our frameworks like 8, 10, 12 hours a day. And obviously we're aware of stuff that is happening elsewhere in the ecosystem, but like I don't really get time to build apps with Svelte. As you were saying, like we don't get time to build apps in general. And the last 3 weeks or so that I've spent working on the Svelte.dev redesign have just been a joyous period for me, because I'm actually getting to build something and see the result, and it's been lovely. But it's such a rare thing if you're a framework author. And so if we don't have time to build stuff with our own frameworks, then we certainly don't have time to build stuff with other people's. What I would say is, this is kind of trite and people say this all the time and it doesn't really sound that appealing in the real world, but you've got to look beyond frameworks. You have to know the fundamentals. Like obviously we would say that our job is to make it so that you don't need to worry about low-level DOM manipulation and all of that stuff. But the only way that you'll be able to hop from one framework to the other is if you understand the underlying substrate that they all have in common. And so, whenever I teach people web development, I don't teach them Svelte, I teach them HTML and CSS and JavaScript. And like, once they're ready, once they've got that down, then we can start talking about libraries and frameworks, but not before. A lot of people have the opposite view. They're like, you got to be productive on day one, otherwise people aren't going to care. And so people start their journey with frameworks. And once you've done that, like, why would you bother learning the fundamentals? But as you say, like, you can't learn everything. It's just impossible. And things come and go. Like Svelte and Qwik are hopefully going to be around for a few years, but they're not going to be around forever. So if you've positioned yourself as a Svelte or Qwik developer, then like you're going to have to reinvent yourself every few years, and that sucks. So learn the fundamentals. It's the only way.
I'm just going to ramble. Sorry. I was just thinking that when I first started playing with computers, was mid 80s. Sorry, I'm dating myself. And like we got a Sinclair ZX Spectrum and it was 64 kilobytes. And I literally, as a kid, I understood the whole thing. Like I understand like how everything worked, the instructions, the assembly language, where the memory was laid out, why it wasn't laid out. It's crazy. Like you could, as a kid, understand it. And now the layers and layers and layers of stuff. Computers do amazing things now, and the UI is amazing, etc. But like, oh, it's not the same. Anyways, told you I was going to ramble.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Because you talked about the layers and layers on top and your childhood story, I would like to ask you, do you think because of the frameworks and libraries coming into existence now, and we don't really know how they were built anymore, do you think people are losing to understand the basics of the fundamentals and getting more into just blindly using the libraries and frameworks, and then one day the skills are going to be lost forever? Do you feel that's
I don't think this is true in a software world. I think it is true in a hardware world, and I'll go on the ramble on that as well. But in a software world, I think software gets rewritten every few years over and over again. And so like, I don't think that's going to be the case. Like, you know, in 10, 20 years, React's not going to be popular. Something else is going to be popular. I don't know what it's going to be. Hopefully it's going to be resumable. I mean, it's going to be resumable, right? Not hydration based. But the point is these things get rewritten. But in hardware, I am worried about that. Like there is this company called ASML. I don't know if you heard about it. And they basically have the only company who figured out how to do X-ray process for lithography, which is how we make chips. And right now they own the market. If you buy yourself like a Apple M3 or any modern CPU, it is done on that machine. If that company somehow goes out of business, I don't know, gets blown up or like I don't know what happens, then like we can't make chips anymore. Like that's crazy, right? And then what? Like how do we recover from that? That's going to be interesting. Anyways, I am totally rambling.
Have you seen the talk by Jonathan Blow called "Preventing the Collapse of Civilization"?
No.
I think it would be up your alley. I don't know how to answer that question because I feel like I know the fundamentals because I've been working with them for long enough, and like you sort of have to if you're building stuff on top of the platform that is intended for other people to use. And so I just don't know. I would turn the question around and ask those of you who are students who are coming into this world, like over the last few years. Do you still learn the fundamentals? Do people care? Or are you seeing that, prospective employers don't care about that stuff? They just want to know if you can do things in React. Like, where are we? How pessimistic should we be? I mean, that's pretty low level.
Possibly? Nobody?
I had to learn it. More training here?
There you go.
The kids are all right.
I'm just I'm gonna ramble because it's late. My background actually is in computer engineering. I don't know how in the world I end up building web frameworks. And so as a computer engineering, like the thing I learned in school is actually how to design chips, transistors, layouts, CPUs. And I think it's just fascinating to be able to kind of be like, oh, well, I used to do that and now I'm doing web frameworks. And so I kind of like can squint and I'm like, I think I know how the layers work in between. But it's interesting when I talk to people and we start discussing performance, for example. people have no idea how the VMs work and what's happening underneath and why it has to happen that way, right? And I think it's super helpful if you understand, for example, assembly language or how CPUs work. Then you're like, oh, this is how CPUs work. This is how JavaScript works. Clearly, somebody has to bridge the difference, and therefore, I can kind of imagine what the compiler's doing, right, to kind of get there. But if you don't have that, it's just fascinating to watch people like just making these crazy assumptions that, you know, that's not just how CPUs work. So I think it's useful to have that insight. And I'm kind of worried that fewer and fewer people actually have that insight. But I'm rambling.
Do you think your background in that field helped you make Angular and Qwik and all of this?
No, it's so completely different that I don't think it necessarily helps. It's quite different. The way, you know, the way you think about the problems, the way you lay out everything, it's very, very different.
I have to be super careful what I say because I work for Vercel, and one of Vercel's very successful products is a thing called V0, which is an AI assistant for web developers. And it, you know, it has its moments when it's like pretty spot on. You can ask it a question about the platform and it will like give you the answer. My experience in general with AI, with Claude and Copilot and stuff like that, is that it is not taking over anytime soon. And yeah, people always say, no, like just think where it's going to be 2 years from now. And I think, you know, we often mistake, like you see this and you think, oh, this is an exponential curve. And actually it turns out to be an S curve because you're going to reach a plateau when you run out of training data or you run out of compute or the economics stop making sense. Like the poster child for this stuff is OpenAI. OpenAI as a business is in dire straits. Like they just led a successful funding round, but their financials are terrible. Like I don't think they're going to be around in a few years, and you know they'll pretty drag Microsoft down with them at this point. So whether this is going to be a thing that makes humans obsolete, I don't personally see it. Maybe I'm just kind of ostriching a little bit because I don't want it to be true. But my experience of using AI in my work has been that it added more work for me to clean up. Like it felt like I was being very productive in the moment. And then I realized that like all this extra junk had crept in that I now had to deal with. To me, it hasn't been worth it, but I don't know. I
have opinions.
Yeah.
All right. This is something actually that's dear to my heart, and I can ramble on this for a while, but I'll make it short. So I was just mentioning to the professor that I have a favorite book, and it's called Thinking Fast and Slow. And have anybody read this book? It is so good. I say it's the human brain user manual. If you have a human brain, you should read that book because it tells you how the brain works. You should absolutely read it. Anyways, the book is written by a guy who spent the whole, the story goes that he went to school and the economics professor says, hey, humans on average are rational. And he goes like, no, they're not. They're systematically irrational. And he spends this whole career proving basically in all the ways that we're broken. But the point of this book is that he says that humans have two brains, which he calls system 1 or system 2 or fast and slow brain, right? And when you read the book, like the guy is a psychologist or psychiatrist or whatever, like he's not a computer science at all, right? But you read the book and you go like, holy shit, system 1 is ChatGPT. Like all the descriptions, how it works and what it does, how it does it, how it predicts stuff, you're like, that's ChatGPT. That's literally what that is. But system 2 is completely different thing. Like it is not something that we can get from ChatGPT to the system 2 part. And the Wolfram Alpha guy has a really good article where he kind of talks about it. And he talks about this idea that like you can have statistical systems. That is kind of what ChatGPT is, right? And you can have mathematically rigorous systems, which is kind of what system 2 is, or rather this symbolic manipulator. Like when we do math, we don't like guess at the answers, right? And it's not like we need more training. You know, the point is that like sometimes you need rigor and sometimes you need statistical probabilities. And that's kind of what system 1 and system 2 is. And so the thing is, we have made amazing progress on the system 1, which is the statistical predictability thing, but just amazing. We have nothing on the mathematical rigor part. Like, we don't have anything that knows how to like symbolically manipulate these things and use useful things. You know the example of like asking ChatGPT how many R's are in strawberry, right? It can't answer that. Or another example is, you know, you ask the ChatGPT like, what's the recipe for yogurt? And it gives you a recipe. And you say, what's the recipe for half the dose of yogurt? And it gives you a recipe, and mostly it's correct. And then you say, what's the 1/7? And it gives you garbage, right? Because it like nobody talks about 1/7 recipe on the web. And so as a result, ChatGPT can't like answer that. And so as a human, you're like, well, that's easy. You just take the regular answer from, you know, system 1 and then just divide it by 7. And we know how to do that. And we know how to do that like predictably, not some in statistical way. And so we know how to get the answer. And so I think what's missing right now is that we have made a fantastic progress on basically what is the system 1, but we have not made much progress on the kind of the symbolic manipulator, the thing that can like make plans and execute on the plans and realize like when you're stuck in a loop and you should stop and do other things, right? We don't really have, you know, the thing that kind of realizes like, oh, time to rethink your priorities because things change or whatever. Like, we don't have anything like that. Like, ChatGPT is not that and will never become that. Anyways, I'll stop rambling.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the AI things, that there also will probably a shift in generations where people grow up with that and will probably be used to build interfaces with AI, maybe start with AI first and then continue maybe on its own, or maybe stick to AI and just reiterate over it with it. And I think probably you more, but I would say me too. We want to see the code, we want to touch it. We may want that AI supports us, but I think we are not sure if we want to give too much control to it. And
sorry, I just want to add something to the AI. Sorry, I think I came off like a little like I don't believe in the AI and all that stuff. That's not true at all. I use it all the time. I think it's great. It is totally helping me to do my job better. I'm just like saying that it will not become sentient. That's all I'm saying. Like, eventually it will, but there's going to be some serious major stuff we have to figure out, and we're nowhere close to that. So anyways, I'm not poo-pooing AI. I think it's great.
And with that, thanks to all of you, especially to you that are still here. It's the first meetup I completely kind of organized. Not completely, I have to say Pace University did a lot and made a lot of things possible, like the location, the food, the technical part. But I learned a lot. I think next time we maybe stick more closely to our plan, make the discussions a little bit longer. I can see that you are really interested in discussing things. And with that, again, thank you. Thanks to Pace University. And also thanks a lot to you both to be here and spend your free time with us.